It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, the election is obviously getting into its last phase. Both of you had predicted in the past that this is going to be a somewhat difficult campaign, or excuse me, election season to call. We're now seeing the Democrats moving from very positive position in terms of the Senate and very challenging races, particularly in Pennsylvania and Georgia, which is what I'd like to cover with you all. The first one is Pennsylvania. And we have this extraordinary situation where the Democratic candidate, John Fetterman, has suffered a major stroke. He is communicating through computers to do interviews. And Fetterman-Oz has kind of come out of nowhere, and now they're almost neck and neck. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I guess we went into this knowing that the Oz-Fetterman race was going to be different, and it's real different. First of all, I think we've said all along that these races are going to tighten. So the fact that it's narrowing in a way is not surprising. I also think that one of the things that Oz has going for him is that Fetterman is a public official, is lieutenant governor, so he has positions on things like law enforcement and gun control and abortion and all that. And Oz has been all over the map on some of these issues, but he doesn't have a voting record. He doesn't have a set of positions that he's taken in public life as much as Fetterman does. And so I do think that the Oz campaign has, if it's possible, gotten its act together. It's focusing on crime issues. It's focusing on the economy. It's focusing on inflation and the damage it's doing. Those issues we've talked about here. And so he has a focus, and he has a candidate who does sadly have a health issue. And so this race is getting closer. I think the thing that I find disturbing, I guess, about all these races is, I can't tell you how many times in the past a friend of mine who's a Republican or a Democrat says, I'm registered as Republican or Democrat, but I really go to the polls and I vote for the person I think can best do the job. We seem now to be running in these races people who we're going to vote for to win simply to get the numbers, favoring Republicans or favoring Democrats. And so the media particularly, I think, is following these races less about the candidates and what they stand for, and more about, will this race tip the balance in the Senate in favor of the Republicans, or can the Democrats hold on? And I understand it, but I think it's regrettable, and I don't think we're getting a real good airing of the capabilities of some of these candidates. But I also think that the voter is not as caught up in that equation in many cases, and so when they go to the polls, we may see a very different outcome.
Al, I also want to get your thoughts about Pennsylvania. I'm sure you saw that NBC interview with Lieutenant Governor Fetterman. I mean, this is a hard thing to deal with. And how would you recommend that John Fetterman proceed? And
well, I think the two races that you've alluded to in Pennsylvania and Georgia are going to likely decide the Senate. As I look at what's going on around the country, Nevada is really up in the air, and Paul Waxout has a 50-50 chance of unseating the incumbent Senator Cortez Masto. And if that happens, then Democrats have to win both Pennsylvania and Georgia to hold the Senate. look, I mean, basically Fetterman's job is to hold on, but let's look at these two states because they're really important. In both of them, President Biden is going to be a drag because he's got a 43% approval rating in Pennsylvania and a 44% approval rating in Georgia. So he's going to sort of be a little bit of a weight on the Democratic candidates. In both states, there are important governor's races that could influence the Senate as well. And in Pennsylvania, that's going to help the Democrats because Josh Shapiro is running well ahead, double digits ahead of an election denying Republican. In Georgia, though, it's going to help the Republicans because Brian Kemp is running ahead of Stacey Abrams and run pretty substantially in most polls, even though that has tightened a little bit. 538 has Fetterman actually as a pretty substantial favorite, or at least a relatively strong favorite, and Senator Warnock in Georgia as a slight favorite. Okay, let's look at where we are. I mean, basically, in Pennsylvania, the latest poll, the Emerson poll, has it at 2 points, 45-43 for Fetterman. That's closer than it has been. But the key is how people react to his stroke. I did see the interview on NBC, and you know, I was nervous, to be honest with you, about Fetterman. I think I've expressed it on this program even before the stroke has become the prominent issue. But basically, the issue is how people are going to react. In the Emerson poll, 19% said it make voters, that's when 1 in 5 said they're not going to, it's going to make them harder to vote for Fetterman, and that's up 5 points in a month. To me, that makes the debate really, really critical. But what he does have going for him is that Fetterman-Oz is not a particularly attractive candidate. He's basically from New Jersey. I've known Fetterman-Oz a long time. He used to come, before he was a rabid right winger, he used to come to DLC events as entertainment when he was a doctor, because he used to carry a case of organs with him to show how if you drank too much, what happened to your liver? If you smoked, what happened to your lungs? And he was very popular on that circuit. Politics, I don't think he's quite so good. But in any event, I mean, basically Fetterman has to just survive and get through that debate. So I do everything I could to prepare him for the debate and hope for the best. I've talked to a number of people in Georgia who I really trust politically. They think that Reverend Warnock is going to win the vote. The question is whether he will avoid a runoff, because in Georgia you have to get 50% for the seat. They sort of think he will, but and he's up 52-47 or 52-45 in a Quinnipiac poll done this week. But, you know, mostly he's been running in the high 40s. His advantage is that he's viewed as honest and has leadership skills and cares about Georgians. And Walker, who is in the midst of a scandal over whether he paid for an abortion for one of his many girlfriends, is viewed negatively. People don't think he's honest by pretty overwhelming numbers, actually. And they don't think he cares about Georgians. They don't think he's a leader. But he has one thing going for him that nobody else has, and that's a Heisman Trophy and a Georgia national championship. He's probably the most famous athlete in Georgia. I think in that race, from what I'm hearing, the key is going to be suburban women. And Stacey Abrams did very well with them last time in 2018, but she's not doing as well this time. Kemp's doing much better. And that really may turn out to be a key as to whether Warnock goes over 50% or not in the election.
You know, Craig, we've been watching these polls. I know that both of you are somewhat skeptical of them. But when I look at some of these, there's a lot of people who say you should add 5% onto the Republican number because they're not participating as they used to in those kind of surveys. Do you think we should bake some of that in as we look at these results so far?
You know, I think the major pollsters are absolutely determined to use algorithms and other techniques to get the right number out. I mean, you have to remember, a poll's not predicting what's going to happen. It's telling you where people are at the moment the poll is taken, and so I think they'll make every effort. There definitely are complications to polling these days, but figuring out how to balance those people willing to respond is something I think they know a lot about. I thought Al's analysis is on target. I frankly have a hard time believing that Republican candidates who are coming at this with some serious flaws are ultimately going to be successful, because as these races tighten, the drama over the issues that are affecting the races, by the way, not necessarily Mr. Trump anymore, but the issues of abortion rights, the issues of the economy, and again, if Republicans in these tight races tend to not, hold views that are consistent with the majority, when people take a hard look at the candidates in the final couple of weeks, it seems to me that Democrats will do a little better. So I always watch where the momentum is going, and the races are tightening, but with that tightening, it's going to make it all the more urgent for Democrats to get their voters to turn out. It always comes back to voter turnout, and the question is whether these Republicans, with the flaws they have, are going to motivate voters to turn out. Al is absolutely right. If the other parts of the ticket bring voters out, that could have a consequence. But I think the hill is steeper for the Republicans still in some of these tight races.
Al, you have the last word.
Well, to answer your question about the polling, I'm sure that the pollsters are trying to adjust because they see the same thing and their credibility is on the line. So I'm sure they're trying to adjust for any Democratic bias. But even so, how they weight the poll. I mean, this week in Georgia, there were two polls, Quinnipiac poll and the University of Georgia poll. And the University of Georgia had Kemp ahead by much more and Warnock a little bit closer. And it all turned, and I don't want to get into the weeds, but I asked one of my friends down there why the difference, and he went through and said, one was more weighted more to the Republicans, one weighted more to the Democrats, and how you weight it can be a 3 or 4 or 5 point difference in the outcome of a poll. I think what Craig says about the Republicans is interesting, because I think the biggest problem that these Republican Trumpy election deniers have is a low ceiling. They can tighten it as Trump could in a presidential, but Trump could never get over 46 or 47%. And I think that may turn out to be key in these races. But it still goes back to what we've talked about for many weeks, which is, whose election is this going to be? Is it going to be a Republican election on the economy and on inflation, in crime and in immigration, or is it going to, or is abortion and the Dobbs decision and concerns about democracy going to be dominant in voters' minds? I think the numbers all tell us it's going to be the economy, crime, and immigration. But what that doesn't account for, is that that may excite people who are going to vote the way they were going to vote before. And the question is whether abortion is and the Dobbs decision is unique in getting a lot of suburban women and a lot of women, even independent women, even some Republican women out who might not vote and who might vote on that issue. It used to be that gun control was never a dominant issue if you ask what are the most important issues, but it used to decide a lot of elections because of the intensity of the voters who were against it. The question is, will abortion be that this year? And if it is, it could help the Democrats.
Well, that's all the time we have for Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, all the way from Italy. Thank you, and we will see you next week.